Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, more disturbing literature. I want to talk to you about Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. So this is one of the books I read for my Disturbing Books project, where I'm reading books that have been recommended to me by viewers as being, particularly interesting, disturbing works of fiction. And I don't know, I've still got mixed feelings about this. It was an interesting book, but it was a book that ultimately I think didn't work for me. So let me tell you what it's about, and then let me tell you why I think it didn't work for me, either as a book generally, or as a disturbing book. So it's structurally quite an interesting and unusual book, in that it is basically a short story collection. So it's got a number of short stories in it, but there is there's like a framing story around that, and that's not, I guess, that uncommon in short story collections to have something like that. In this case, it's the framing story is about a group of writers who are going on like a retreat, and they get stuck in like an abandoned building, and there's no food, and like terrible shit happens as you might expect from that introduction. So that story continues throughout the book, and you get like an extra or a new chapter of what's happening to these characters interspersed between each of the short stories. You also get, and the idea is that each of the short stories is written by one of these writers, and you also get poems about the writers as well. So you kind of get chapter of the book, poem, short story, chapter of the book, poem, short story, which is fine, I guess, and it could have been quite interesting. So right. So let's go through what I least liked about it. So the poems just did nothing for me at all. So I've said on the channel before, I'm not really a fan of poetry. I have read some poetry that I've enjoyed, but I feel like I just generally speaking don't really get poetry. I like stories. That's what I read for. I read for stories, and I think that's why I tend to gravitate, much more towards novels and short stories than I do towards non-fiction and other forms of writing. Stories are what does it for me. So poetry, I don't know. And the other thing that didn't work for me, as I say, but it worked at times, is this framing story. And the problem for me with the framing story is it's quite an interesting concept, and you can see how Chuck Palahniuk could have made it quite absorbing, and so both as a way of pulling the reader through the book, so you've got something that you keep going back to and you want to find out what happens next, but also in terms of introducing you to these characters of the writers and then giving you a story that's supposed to be written by them. The problem I had with it was that the characters I just completely failed to connect with. And they've all got strange names, like there's one called the Matchmaker and one called the Chef Assassin and things like that. So they're clearly supposed to be, kind of symbolic of something. But because of that, I just didn't connect with them as characters at all, and therefore just didn't care about what happened to them. So when disturbing stuff does happen in this story, and there is some very disturbing stuff, it had much less impact on me because I couldn't give a shit what happened to these people, and I think that's something I've talked about before in these videos where I reviewed disturbing books as being something that makes me less disturbed and less engaged with the book. Is if I don't care about the characters, the book doesn't have such an impact on me. So that was a problem. But the other problem was all of the short stories felt like they were written by Chuck Palahniuk. There was no real difference in tone or anything like that between any of them. So it didn't feel like an experiment in writing, by having these different characters supposedly writing these stories, because they all felt the same to me. So the poetry didn't work, and the overarching story didn't really work. What did work was the short stories. So the short stories were actually pretty good, and I think I would have much preferred this book if it had just been a collection of short stories without all the kind of fancy stuff wrapped around it. The short stories weren't all great, but some of them were really good. and very disturbing. So the first story I think was probably my favourite, which I won't go into details because it's very easy to spoil a short story, isn't it? But it's about how can I describe it? It's about an autoerotic accident, shall we say, or a series of autoerotic accidents, which really make your skin crawl. And I still am thinking about it now. It's just so gross and disgusting what happened in this story. So that had a real impact on me. And there's a couple of other ones that are similarly, unpleasant and creepy and just I can't think of a word to describe them, that just really got to me. There's one about like artificial dolls that he used by a police department, for example, which was really grim and very disturbing indeed. And he does do a good job of tying, there are themes that you can see developing through these stories as they go on. So that kind of worked for me. In terms of the style of his writing, the only thing I'd read by him before was Fight Club, which is probably the book, it's his most popular book, isn't it, because of the movie. So it's probably the book most people have read by him. And these stories have a similar style in that they're quite in your face. They're quite funny at times. They're kind of satirical, darkly funny, and quite gross, and violent and unpleasant and disturbing. He's definitely, he definitely has the ability to both make me laugh and make me feel like I'm going to puke, which is, those are both difficult things to elicit in somebody else sometimes. But I did feel at times like he was just being deliberately offensive. Like that first story in particular, it read, and some of the other stories in the collection did as well, it read like something you would have seen on, like one of those internet message boards in the early days of the internet that were just about being as gross and disgusting as possible. So it definitely felt like there was part of that in this book. So yeah, overall, I kind of liked 50% of it. Like I say, if it had just been the collection of short stories without everything else, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more. I'm not sure why he decided to wrap all this crap around there. But for me, that was to the detriment of the stories. But most of the stories I thought were pretty decent. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I think without the wraparound stuff, I probably would have given it 4 stars. But it just made me reluctant to pick up the book. I felt like I was having to get through the having to get through these additional parts in order to get to the next story. So that for me was a bit disappointing. But clearly, he's an author that a lot of people really like. A lot of people I respect really like. So do let me know in the comments, what your opinion of him is and of this collection. Is it representative of his work generally, do you think, or is there something else I should try? Okay, time for a random book from the shelves. So today's book is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. So I talked in my review of Haunted about failing to make a connection with the characters in the book, and that being a hindrance to my enjoyment of the book. This book is kind of almost the opposite of that, in that the central character in this book, I don't feel like I've ever read a book whose central character I connected with and related to quite as much as the central character in this book. I almost felt like it's a book about like a teenage boy at school, and I almost felt like it was a book about me when I was at school, which if you've read the book tells you all sorts of things about my personality and my psychology that you may find interesting. So yeah, I thought this was quite a wonderful book and really, really, really emotionally impacted me when I read it. So I hope you found that interesting. Like I said, I know loads of people love Chuck Palahniuk, and I've probably been a bit down on him in this review. So if you disagree with me, do let me know. Let me know what I should try next by him. I'm certainly willing to read more things by him, because when he's good, I think he's excellent. There was just a lot of stuff in this book that I thought was less than good. So yes, anyway, let's leave it there. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're really good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.